Okay, Megas, welcome to the reboot of the Meg podcast. Could call it season 2, I suppose, if you like, but we very much see this as continuity from the previous ones. We've just had a bit of a summer break, a late summer break. As many of you may know, unfortunately, Ray, who has kicked off this whole podcast a few months ago, unfortunately, as real life has intervened, and he doesn't really have the time to run the podcast anymore. But myself, Richard Jeffrey Cook, and Matt Haywood are going to take up the baton, hopefully carry on in the footsteps that Ray started us off on. So obviously, I think at this point, we would very much thank Ray for doing that, because I think a lot of people have found the podcast really interesting, and certainly I've enjoyed it immensely doing them. So hopefully we can carry on with that. So a big thank you to Ray, certainly from myself on that, and hopefully actually we'll be able to get him in on the podcast as a guest in the future. I'm sure if he does well in a competition, we will be able to twist his arm and he can come and tell us just how well he did, despite the dice he will undoubtedly be rolling. As like a good wargamer, he always complains about his dice, but then again, don't we all? So just myself and Richard carrying on as we have before, very much hopefully a keep calm and carry on. Matt Haywood is very kindly going to do a lot of the technical stuff in the background, but also I am hoping that he will be contributing on a regular basis. So can we persuade you to do that, Matt?
Oh, absolutely. I'm all up for it. I think the techie includes. Does that mean I get to do the Ray's bit of gesticulating wildly and swearing a lot, and then editing it out of myself?
As long as you can edit it out, I'm sure. So anyway, to move along and stop me just waffling about the past, I think what we're going to do on this first episode of season 2 is to have a bit of a retrospective, a look back at the recent Skullrollers competition held a few weeks ago as part of the London GT. Obviously, Skullrollers is MEG's World Championships. Okay, at the moment with still enough COVID around that, unfortunately, not too many people coming in from other countries, so it's very much UK dominated. But we had Jacques and Hub from Belgium, and Panos came in from Greece. So we had some international contribution there, which is great to see people coming in. So what was it, 30 of us played 5 games over 2 days. So we're going to look back on that, see how we did. Now, obviously, as some of you may know, with my egotistical head on, I've already published some accounts of my games at Skullrollers, so I'm not going to repeat that and bore you all to death by basically telling you how good my shooting dice were with my Seljuk army. But I'm going to pass over to Richard, who it must be said also performed very well at the competition, to have a look at the army he took, maybe explain why he took it, and give us an overview on how his games went. So I will now shut up and hand over to Richard.
Thank you, Nick, and good evening, everyone. So at the London Grand Tournament, I had decided to take a chariot army, Mitanni, which is in the Egypt and Hatti lists section. Let's start by running through quickly the army because it's not overly complex. So the army had 8 units of 4 chariots. 2 of those chariots were superior. The other 6 were average. That involved downgrading some from the list norm. And all the chariots were a skilled bow. So that amounted to 32 chariots, all with skilled bow. So that's 16 files potentially of skilled shooting pumping out there, which is quite good. Along with that, I'd found during playtesting that you needed some infantry to counter enemy archers as much as anything. So I actually had a unit of, I think they're Iki spearmen. So they are form loose, average protected short spear with integral shooters. That was a unit of 8. Some Awaluti Kashati. Apologies to any Mittani who have been offended by my pronunciation there, but they were form loose, average unprotected, but skilled bow, but they were combat shy. And then finally a unit of 8 Shuktuli, I think they are. They are infantry form loose, average unprotected, experienced bow, short spear and shield cover. So they're an interesting troop type. And along with that, I had a skirmishing unit of 6 just ordinary average unprotected experienced javelin men. So that was the army. Breaks on 6 tugs, but bearing in mind 8 of those tugs are only 4 strong. That's still a bit scary. The command structure was a talented professional CNC, 3 competent subgenerals. So 13 cards overall, which gives you lots of ability to react to opponents' moves when you need to get those chariots at the right distance to be shooting. It also gives me 8 PBS cards and 3 scouting cards. One of the things, along with that, it also had a poor fortified camp. So the fortified camp is handy because it means that a lot of enemy mounted troops, for example, just ignore it. And to be honest, any foot that are likely to reach the end of the table to sack your fortified camp have probably been shot to bits by the chariots first, so you've either won the game or not. So that was the army. I should mention the troops with the shield cover. You can actually shoot and continue to use the shield cover because they consist of front rank of spearmen and then the rest of the archers behind. So that's another advantage of those archers.
Very nasty for opposing horse archers.
Yeah, and they can give opposing longbowmen a run for their money as well, which is quite handy. Yeah, I mean, the main fear with the army is obviously enemy power bow. They're not very pleasant at all. Also, artillery was to prove an interesting challenge with at least one of the armies, which I'll come to. The sheer power of the shooting you're putting up, that can slow down enemy cavalry, and if you're prepared to run away when you have to and then skirmish when you need to, you can react to most things. Obviously fully armored troops are a bit of a worry with the armored horse, but then they're slowed down, so that overall they're not a greater threat, really, put it like that. So how did it actually do? Well, the first of my 5 games was against an Italian Wars Florence army from the Italian War set, so you couldn't really get more ahistorical, really, except for one of my army's opponents later. But this was 1505, I think, whereas my Mittani army was about 1400 BC, so nearly 3,000 years difference there. The Florence army was run by Rob Hutton. Rob's perhaps still learning the game, and so the Mittani were a bit of a struggle for him. The army he'd taken was 2 lots of condottieri with Castilias behind, so they're the knights. They were fully armored horse, charging lancer, dev charger, melee expert. So they're A, very expensive, and B, they're not moving particularly fast. So they take a bit of work there's a bit of a struggle to catch the chariots. They were supported by a unit of mounted crossbowmen, average protected, experienced crossbow melee expert. So that could put out a bit of shooting, but was, again, you can overpower that. But it being a 6, it was a bit more of a something to be aware of. The solid core of the army is 2 lots of 12 lang-shaped pikes with halberdiers. They were sort of drill close, average protected pike, shove, keel, and one of them had melee expert. Because they were 12s, they're always going to take forever to shoot down, even with the green dice. So my main aim was just to avoid shooting at those whenever I could, and concentrate on the more vulnerable bits. The 2 pike units were supported by a unit of sword and buckler men. They were just average protected melee expert, a 6, so I definitely regarded them as a target. The militia spearmen, who were form close, average protected short spear and shield wall, another unit of 6, and then 2 units of average experienced crossbow. They were 6s, so I regarded them as targets as well. To support those, Rob had a unit of 9 skirmishing crossbowmen, average unprotected experienced crossbow, and a unit of 6 poor experienced firearm handgunners. Skirmishers are a bit of a nuisance to the Mittani army because you can waste time having to shoot the skirmishers away. In the meantime, they can do damage to your 4s, and as soon as you take a base off, a 4 is becoming vulnerable. So in the end, I did win the game, but by really focusing on the vulnerable bits and staying away from the pike and halberdiers. So that started me off well with a nice 15 point win. I should mention, Rob, actually, I had played this army in a practice game the week before the tournament, just the way the draw worked out, unfortunately. Both Rob knew my army, I knew his, so but unfortunately the practice game didn't help Rob as much as it helped me.
Can be the way, can't it? You know.
Yeah. So on to game 2. Game 2 was equally, or if even more, unhistorical, because it was up against Lee Sanders using Takeda Japanese. So this is even later, 1570. So you're really almost into the Renaissance period at this time. The Japanese armies are always a bit of a mystery to me. This one is primarily a lance-based army, so it has although I say that, that's not really actually, looking at the army itself isn't really true. It had 6 superior charging lance and melee expert, so they were a real threat because they're moving fast. Superior means I'm down to white S dice when shooting at them, and give them a general and prompt through fire, and I'm in danger of getting caught, so I'm probably running away, so that drops down a colour, so it's the black S dice, and you're not going to do an awful lot of damage unless you get lucky against those. So they were a threat. There were 3 units of the Bushi Samurai with the retainers, so these are half and half, formed loose, superior protected, skilled powerbow melee expert, backed up with average protected melee expert. And they so they were a real threat because skilled powerbow are not a chariot's best friend, getting upgraded for powerbow and being upgraded for skilled, particularly since a lot of my chariots were average rather than superior. So a lot of nasty dice coming my way from those.
Richard, sorry to butt in, but were those the sort of pirate ally types?
Yeah,
that
they're
list
the
could have?
I think they're the Murakami clan, which are the pirates from somewhere inland. It's a big inland sea. I think they were based around.
Are these the ones that, if they charge or you charge them, they use
switch
firearm or something?
Yeah, they switch to experienced firearm. So which actually against chariots they drop in terms of effectiveness, but
Oh yes, it will, won't it? Because it's stop being power bow.
yeah. So but to be honest, charging them head on would be pretty suicidal anyway for the chariots, because they were only 4s, so it didn't become a thing in the end. The rest of the army is pretty standard. The infantry are formed or drilled flexible, protected long spear, supported by Lee had a unit of poor, experienced bow archers that kept skulking away. So yeah, I really didn't know what I was going to do against this army, and to be honest, it drove me back and then beat me when it pinned me into combat. So in the end, I think I got 8 points, which was respectable. But that was a victory for Lee. And then moving swiftly on to the third game of the day was against Peter Cross and his early Carthaginians. This was a fairly sort of standard early Carthaginian. The tweak in it was that it had Numidian allies, and the Numidian ally had elephants in, which is not historical. But yeah, anyway, as far as
a clever spot by Peter.
it was, but I mean, it had a unit of 4 elephants in there. To be honest, I didn't mind because I can shoot up elephants. They're quite a good target for the chariots. He also had a unit of the Punic chariots, which he made superior protected. They get experienced javelin, short spear, melee expert, shoot and charge, devastating charges. But they were only a 4. Except there were 2 of them. I have to say, all respect to Peter, I think he didn't use them effectively. He was concerned because I outflanked him on that side, and he was worried if he committed the chariots, they would get outflanked and in the flank. But in the end, I in effect neutralized them, and they were an awful lot of points doing not much. He had a big solid block of African spearmen in the middle. They're form close, average protected long spear. It would take me forever to shoot those, so I actually focused mainly on the supporting troops on the side. He had a unit of 6 Campanian cavalry, superior protected, unskilled javelin, short spear. Those did catch one of my chariots, but I was able to draw them forward and basically shoot them up. So I got even match on those. There are also some Ligurian foot. I think they're compulsory within the army, and some Gallic foot, along with a couple of units of Numidian cavalry skirmishers and some infantry, poor unprotected experienced javelin. Numidians, which protected his African spearmen and lasted longer than they should have done, as far as I was concerned. So in the end, I eventually got the 5 tugs I needed to break his army, but it was a bit of a struggle. But I never really felt threatened by Peter's army. It was a case of just trying to get the points there. So 15 points in the end. So I finished the first day on 38 points, which was very respectable. Moved on to the second day and ended up playing Paul, who was one of the other people I had a practice game with. So that was a bit frustrating in some respects, not least because this time Paul clearly had learnt how to fight my army and didn't make the mistakes he made in his first game against me.
That's a deeply underhand thing to do, if you ask me.
Absolutely. Learning from your mistakes. How dare you? The neat feature of Paul's army, I have to say, it was Imperial Roman Eastern with a Saracen ally, which is an interesting mix I hadn't seen before. But the nice feature, which is quite clever, he put 3 units of our legionaries with the integrated cart-mounted artillery and downgraded them so they were poor. And so you essentially have a unit of 4, 3 drilled flexible average protect impact weapon shield cover legionaries, and the 4th, which is the artillery. Now the neat thing about that is, poor with shield cover, you're still don't get any benefit of shooting poor as opposed to shooting average troops, and the shield cover still counts. So you end up, all I could get shooting at the poor legionaries were white dice, and because he kept them cleverly between his veteran and guard legionaries, who were the superior types, I never really had any opportunity to threaten the artillery. And meanwhile, the artillery were shooting between the gaps or even shooting overhead, and were getting, because artillery gets an up against chariots, were taking pot shots with green dice, a bit like tank hunters was my reaction. So that did quite a bit of damage. In the end, the game turned into a draw. I think it was an 8-6 or an 8-4 to Paul. I think to get a higher score, he needed to be a bit more rash and throw a bit of caution to wind, and he chose not to, which is fair enough. I just couldn't really wear him down. That shield cover was just too effective. He also had benefited from terrain. He got a nice vineyard on a hill right in the middle of the battlefield, which really limited what I could do with my chariots. So that game ended up in a draw, and then that meant the final game I was playing against Paul Cummins, a contributor to this podcast, and his later medieval Polish. Now, this later medieval Polish list is not for the faint-hearted, I think it's probably fair to say. It's got Lithuanian cavalry who are superior protected experienced bow, short spear, shoot and charge. He had allied cavalry, which are Polish, I think, so they're actually an integral part of the army, not a separate ally. They were formerly superior. Oh, they were the same, basically. Superior protected experienced bow, short spear, shoot and charge. And then he had some average unprotected ones as well. Those are known as the less protected cavalry. He then had a unit of war wagons, who are not Chariot's best friend, really. They were average protected experienced crossbow and polearm, but I just stayed away from them. He then had and I'm going to get this pronunciation completely wrong, Taurazine. These are the cavalry which are mixed in with the
We ought to bring Matt in on this one. Matt being a bit of a fan of Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
Perhaps he can, because I haven't got a clue how you pronounce it either.
It's easy. One means companions, one means shooters. I'm not even going to attempt it. It's been years since, and I just embarrassed myself, quite frankly. And
basically, they are mixed, superior, fully armoured, charging lancer melee expert cavalry, supported by average protected, experienced crossbow shoot and charge in half and half. And then he had the final 9th unit of his army was form flexible, average protected, charging lancer melee expert. They're the hussars. An interesting army. It didn't start well for me. In his first charge against my chariots with the shoot and charge, he rolled 3 wounds on the white dice and slowed me by 2 and caught me, having taken off a base and a wound. So I didn't think the battle was going to go well. In fact, I was convinced I was going to lose right from the start. But you plug away. That's what I learned with the Mittani. The Mittani is an army where you just plug away. But the turning point in the battle was when I probably moved my skilled shooters out of the rough going to try and take a pot shot at his cavalry that were threatening my chariots. Then realised I couldn't get back into the rough going before these knights, companions and shooters could charge me. So this was not going to go well, I thought. But it left a fatal gap. I was able to get a unit of chariots round the rear of his knights and companions. And in what proved to be the last turn of the game, charging them in the rear, I needed 3 bases to break the unit. And I had 2 files going into his rear, and lucky me, I rolled a skull and a wound with the red and green dice on both files, broke the unit and actually broke his army at that point. I had, at the time, I had 3 units which were wound off routing, and a 4th unit which was in melee, and I think in the melee turn, a skull would have broken it. So it was well outclassed. So I managed somehow to drag a victory from the jaws of defeat, or Paul did the reverse. I'm still not sure which was which. So ended up in a respectable 8th place out of 30.
I think that last game is good illustration with these shooting armies, especially the mounted shooting armies. You say just keep plugging away, just keep working on it.
Yeah, I was fortunate in that 2 of those units which were wound off breaking, I was able to pull out of the battle line and get well away, so they weren't going to take any captives from anybody else breaking. And yeah, you with the Mittani, you certainly have to wait until the gaps appear in your enemy's line. Once you can get in and around the backs and so on, then you're having a field day. But the challenge is actually to achieve that in the first place.
Yeah. As I said, a couple of weeks before Skullrollers, I played Paul when he was trying this army out for the first time, and it's I think it's an adrenaline rush army to use, I suspect.
Well, he did win the prize for having the combined highest total of points killed and points inflicted of any army at LGT. So
he did, yes, that's right.
Yeah. So it was obviously, one of those die or be killed.
Yeah, but even when it dies, it does a lot of damage.
Yeah.
Did you tend to attack, Richard? Did you aim to control the terrain, or did you prefer to defend?
I didn't. I learned with the Mittani, I didn't care about the terrain much at all. Um, I in the end, I found it more useful to hold cards back for the scouting score and see where my opponent was deployed rather than worrying about terrain. It's very hard to get so much terrain in the center of the battlefield that the Mittani are worried about it, because you've got powerful shooting on a relatively narrow frontage. And the thing that actually none of my opponents really picked on other than Lee is the worst thing for the Mittani is having terrain at your back, because it gives you nowhere to run to. So your opponent knows where you're going to be deployed. Yeah, rather than deploying terrain to protect your own army, I think there's actually a lot to be said for deploying terrain to muck up your opponent's, when you're against a shooty army like the Mittani, to muck up your opponent rather than give them nowhere to run to. And that, I mean, that's perfectly valid historically. I mean, the First Crusade, that's how Bohemond defeated the Turkomans, because he trapped them against a mountain range and they had nowhere to run to. So yeah, that's my view.
I'd agree with Richard on that. I mean obviously I took a shooty cavalry army. I took my Seljuks of Rum again, and I got 4 tables that were basically open, which suited me down to the ground. I think my Seljuks probably need it more open a bit than Richard. I don't have the infantry that Richard has got, and also a lot of my shooters are unprotected, so I probably need a little more space. I'm going to be running away a bit more. But the last game against John Monroe, which I lost, certainly a bit of a factor in that was having some terrain to my rear, which did force me to not quite deployed maybe as I would like to, because I knew I was going to be falling back. So it does constrain your options. I think Richard's absolutely right. Sort of the offensive use of terrain against your opponent, thinking how it's going to hamper them is definitely something worth thinking about.
Yeah, it's interesting that, because it's not something I'd overly consider, because a lot of my armies are agnostic when it comes to terrain, so I don't really care what goes down. But I've never really considered, as you say, being offensive with my line of trees.
Yeah, I mean, I think Richard, you mentioned it in a previous podcast some time ago, when I think you played Nigel Emson, didn't you? Where he ended up with, he had Emishi army basically had a wood completely behind it.
Yes, and Nigel had absolutely nowhere to run to when I chased him down with my early Germans. So
yeah, so maybe an extreme version, but it certainly can give a headache to a skirmishing cavalry army. So there we are. We have all learned something from Richard tonight.
Yeah, in summary, I would say that I wouldn't try to claim it's necessarily historical when you take it out of the context of the biblical lists, the chariot lists, but in terms of an actual army for competitions, it's certainly a viable choice.
Actually, just on that, Richard, it's something that crossed my mind, especially after seeing you taking this army to Skullrollers and placing well. Was you were by far the oldest army, if you like, in the competition, the one furthest back in time. And I wonder about Matt's view on this as well, is whether people discount the biblical armies in more open competitions. They see them as only working in biblical. I know previous sets of rules that's very much been the case, but not sure it applies to MeG.
There are plenty of armies in the chariot lists that are not viable for open competition, but there are certainly quite a few that I think have possibilities. Isan Larsa is one of those armies lists that is worth a look at. So Yeah, I think there are quite a few that have possibilities.
Yeah, it's something that I've wondered about, and the attraction for the biblical is, well, for me, it's chariots and they look pretty, but you know, there is. I don't even know if it's the division of lists. I don't know how many lists date-wise we go to. Do we, as we get later on, have more and more lists appearing? So you've actually got a small pool for biblical. So on the whole, people don't look at them.
There are something like 60. I'll get the exact number wrong, but there's something like 60 chariot lists covering really 3000 BC to 600 BC. So, yeah, I mean, if you compare the medieval lists, you have something like 200 covering the period 1100 to 1500. So you do get a much greater density of lists in the medieval period because there are just, well, the sources are better and there's more variety, really. I mean, some of the early chariot lists are guesswork, really. We've got a few. Well, I mean, the dynasty of Sealand, for example, we have a few references, and we have one fort that was excavated in 2012, 2014. And in fact, that fort in southern Iraq is the first real physical evidence for the existence of the dynasty of Sealand. Other than that, it was just references in the histories of other nations.
So yeah, very, very thin evidence indeed. So yeah, but I'm just thinking, maybe about my last thought on this as a liker of mobile shooty armies. A big difference when you look at, you say your army compared to my Seljuks is, all your shooty mounted people are protected, whereas most of mine are unprotected, which which does make quite a difference. Protected if you get into a shooting fight.
Yeah, I mean, the against unprotected troops, you can even do the tactic of going one deep, because you're getting a plus for the skill and the plus for the lack of protection. So you're still using green dice, yet with one rank. And I did that against one of my opponents, I remember, and they were quite horrified that I was getting 6 files of shooting from two yes, one was 2 deep, the other 1 deep, and 4 green and 2 yellow dice, focused on their unit of 8. Yes, that can do a lot of damage quite quickly.
It is. It can indeed. Okay,
Richard, for patience. You do sometimes you'll get that lucky double skull from 2 green dice, and a lot of the time you end up with 2 blanks. So you just have to accept that and keep plugging away.
Yeah, shooty cavalry armies teach you patience, definitely. Okay, Richard, thank you very much. We've for that. I think it's time to give you a break. I think time to ask Matt to earn a bit of his crust now, perhaps, because I'd just like to ask Matt to give us some thoughts from the outside, because he wasn't able to attend the Skullrollers. Some thoughts maybe on some of the lists that were there, because all the lists have been published on the web. So I know Matt has had a look at them. So maybe give some thoughts and maybe maybe some insight of how he might have approached some of those lists if he had been able to turn up.
Yes, yeah. Well, oddly, well, it's not oddly. Paul and I had discussed it quite a bit. I was also taking later medieval Polish because, well, I'm glutton for punishment, basically. But mine was a slightly different build to Paul's. I went with, I built it around 4 blocks of the mixed knight crossbow units, whereas Paul went with the superior Lithuanian cavalry. The reason I hadn't gone for the cavalry, the superior Lithuanians, was they didn't have melee expert. And what I found was once they got into combat, they tended to get cut to pieces because that melee expert was so important in like the early rations that I ran early on in the year. So it didn't work for me. So I took 4 blocks a night. I also wanted war wagons, but because I'm slightly deranged, I thought, no, I won't take the ones within the Polish list. What I did was I took a micro Hussite ally of 2 tugs of 2 war wagons, and each of those tugs upgraded half to light artillery. So it was 4 war wagons was the ally, and half of it was the light artillery war wagons. And the aim was, it wasn't going to be big, but it was going to sit in the middle of the table and just battleships of old, and just put a pressure up to 8 base widths away, and just generally annoy people, whilst everything else worked to kill it. That was the theory, anyway.
A shooting terrain feature.
Yes. If you remember my DBM days, it was almost like the horde that I used to run in my Khitan Lao, where just line it up and just charge straight up the table and use it as an offensive piece of terrain. And that was the same principle. I wasn't under any illusions that it was going to be a tricky army to run, and I think Paul was of the same ilk, but we discussed it so much, I think we both decided we were going to do it. And then the runners and riders came out, and then we both looked at it and went, it was a very heavy metal field for starters, so that was slightly worrying. I was expecting a bit more of a broader field to the armies, but there was a lot of the big metal pikes and 100 Years War English, that kind of thing. And I thought, well, anyway, yeah. So my usual pondering over the list prior to the event, and thought how the Polish would fare against the various lists. So what I thought I'd do here is I'd just talk about the top 10.
Okay, yeah, sure.
And then maybe pull out a few others that I thought were interesting or had me concerned. I mean, in reverse order for the top 10, there was Sid with his Hussites, and I'm going to say his Hussites because Sid has very much made it his own army. He's crafted the list superbly, knows how to use it, and he takes the Polish ally and all the optional cavalry, and it makes it a really great counterpunch army. But it can also launch a focused attack. It wouldn't have been a fun matchup for me, and I actually figured my best bet was a combination of terrain if I could get it. Doesn't always happen. But also screening my 4 Hussite war wagons so I could get them in a position to start killing his wagons before he killed mine. Because neither of us had any infantry of any note, unless we started dismounting, and that just gets worse for both sides. So that was the general aim, was to try and get my war wagons into a position where I would force him to attack with his cavalry to stop me knocking a hole. That was the theory. I honestly don't know if it worked or not. I figured when I looked at the field that Sid was probably going to end up with a couple of incomplete games or bloody losses as Heavy Foot ran him over, to be frank. I thought he was a contender for the top, but I thought the army might struggle. But he did well with it, and he had some really nasty opposition.
Oh, it would have been a nightmare for me. I was really glad not to face it.
I think he fought Steve Swiss, which, funnily enough, was the 9th position army, and this was the one army I really wanted to be there to see in person, because Steve's done a stunning job on it, and I have yet to see it. And it's a brutal in-your-face army, being later Swiss. I kind of figured he'd be looting my camp before the end of the game, because there was no way I was going to be able to stop him coming forward. And it's one of those armies I felt would either brutalize me, tear me apart, or I'd get it in the flanks and the rear. Because the advantage, well, the later Polish list has some really nice flexible Lancer Horse and the Hussars, and it also takes drilled knights. So it actually maneuvers really well with professional generals. So as long as you don't get pinned on the terrain, or you can get around a flank, it's got a chance against that kind of army. It only needs to stop him in the middle of the table, and then you can work it. But again, I expected Steve would do well with it, but would probably stall out, possibly in terrain, or just run out of time against some armies. But it's nice to see it make it into the top 10, quite frankly, because it's.
It is. I mean, I had the pleasure of playing it in my 3rd game on the Saturday. It is a beautiful army. I did feel a bit of guilt anytime Steve had to take a base off. I mean, it was, and I have to say, Steve was great to play against. I don't think I may have played him briefly back in the DBM days, but never before. But it was, and I played him on what was basically an open table, which was really quite hard work for him, and you know, all credit to Steve. He just knuckled down, did the best he could, and I just ran round him and picked on the bits I could. You know, and that was one of his big losses. But yeah, a beautiful army. People have posted pictures of it on various sites. And I certainly posted a couple of pictures of it. An absolute pleasure to play against something that just looks that nice. You know, it's a real great advert for it. And actually, just on the great advert thing, great advert for MeG. You know, it's there with 3 Kyles of pike, like the Swiss are described as using, and it's brutal frontally, and it's on you like nobody's business.
Yeah,
you know, it really feels like a Swiss army should feel. So yeah, lots of plus points there.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things MeG does really well, is it gives the Swiss the chance, which many rule sets just don't. You just can't get them to work in a lot of rule sets, I found. I mean, it may have changed because I've only recently come back to Ancients, but certainly it's nice to see it having that chance. And then we come to Richard's Mittani, which I had actually seen in Richard using round Rays prior to the competition. And I'm going to be honest, I ended up deciding that I'd come up with a plan on the day if I ended up facing it, because I just couldn't get my head around it, to be brutally honest. It was like my army had things that were of an advantage to me, but then I was thinking it's so many swarms of chariots which are skilled shooters. I kind of lost the plot thinking about it for so long that I thought, no, I'll sort it out on the day. I mean, I'd have been interested to see if the artillery and the wagons would have given Richard some pause, or he'd found a cunning way to negate them.
Keep away from them.
Yes,
Richard's guide to artillery.
yeah, they're not particularly fast moving. It would take me a while to trundle them into the game, I think. I have to say, it's a list I really love the design of. I'm pretty certain I couldn't use it, but I do really like it, and I was really pleased to see it play so well, because it was a very different choice and very nicely put together. But then it was Jack's Nicophorian Byzantine. And I've got to be honest, I really want to fight Nicophorian Byzantines in competitions, as my army choices tend to have the toolkit to pick them apart, or just brute force them even. But post-competition, when I actually saw his list, I just took a step back almost and went, what the? It wasn't what I was expecting in any way, shape or form. And I think if that had landed on the table cold, very high end, he really built a brutal, shooty combat army. Is that what it would be?
Well, basically, he's taken all the expensive toys, hasn't he? He took the Tagmatic Cavalry of Superior, you know, the Thematic Cavalry, Norman Mercenaries, the Cataphractoi, the Varangian Guards as exceptional, and then sort of as an because you almost have to just fill it up, a single unit of Scutatoi and the Armenian Mercenaries, you know. And he had a legendary general. You know, you say it's 8 tugs. That's it.
Yeah,
I must be. Let's check it. Oh, the unit of Procursatores. He's just maxed out on the big expensive toys, and it's a certain amount. Well, go ahead and what are you going to do about it?
Yes, oddly, it's something I really don't want to fight frontally. Which, considering I'm an army built to go pound into things,
it is. Well, again, this is one of the armies I fought, and unfortunately, due to circumstances beyond anybody's control, we couldn't get a full game in. It's really interesting to fight it, because you just look at, oh right, okay, yeah, these are really, really tough. It's one of those games where I got some flank charges in. Flank charges didn't do too much, and then things like the Normans turn around and batter your horse archers to death really quickly. But yeah, I must admit, when I looked at it, I thought, oh no, I thought this army, it's not going to do that well. And then Jacques finished 7th.
Yeah.
So from my initial estimate, big overperformance. Jacques obviously knew what he was doing, and he played a very sensible game against me. So big props to Jacques there, for taking a really unusual composition and doing well with it.
Yeah, it would definitely have got. In that format, it was definitely my award for bravest choice. I think possibly you could.
It also has an interesting command structure of the legendary army commander, and then just two mediocre sub generals. So it's, I mean, okay, it's only got 8 units, but 9 cards is not a lot of cards to operate with. But there again, I was thinking, what would I have done with my Mittani? Because everything that you sort of go up against, you've got charge only bow charging lancer. So if he shoots at you and gets lucky, you're slowed down, he's then going to catch you and bye chariot unit. The Norman mercenaries are superior, so you're down on your shooting there to white S. You've got Cataphractoi, who's both superior and armored horse, fully armored. So, yeah, good luck shooting on the black S dice with those against those. Varangian Guard are exceptional.
And shield cover.
And shield cover. And you've got Scutata, who have shield cover. And
shoot back at you through it.
And shoot back at you, yeah. So didn't leave an awful lot to there was certainly wasn't a weak link you felt there, really. Yeah, even the flexible Armenian mercenaries, they could probably skulk in a forest or something and leap out at you at the worst moment. So yeah, I can understand why it did quite well.
Yeah, no, I think it's well done, Jackie. I'll say it again.
Then it was Paul's Imperial Roman, which, like Richard, I had fought the week before, and so knew it quite well. And it's one of those armies that I really rated Paul's use of it. It's not the design I would have used. And as Richard said, the 3-4 base Paul legionary units were a really interesting twist, and it would have negated my war wagons, because they really don't like being shot at by artillery. Although interestingly, it does mean if he's trying to shoot at the war wagons, he's getting in range of all my mounted bows and stuff, and being poor, it makes it a little more even. But I thought of it. I thought I could take it in a fair fight, and then I realised the Romans don't fight fair. So it was going to be one way or the other. I'm not surprised he did well with it, given how he handled it when I was testing out my Polish. So yeah, it was a good shout on his part.
Yeah, I found, again, because I list checked this competition. It's an army looked at and thought, that's a bit weird. I don't like the look of that. And then it did well, and I gone back and looked at it and thought, actually, it's quite clever. It's got some nice stuff in there, and it's. I think it falls into the category of a list I might nick and maybe tweak it a bit, but yeah, it's a bit of a revelation.
Yeah, it was definitely one of those. It was a sum. It was more than the sum of its parts.
Absolutely, because I did think the Saracen ally really, but that provides a superior cavalry unit, a couple of filler units, but does make it more than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, and it's got a really nice block of skirmishing skilled effectively when they're in Canterbury.
Yeah.
And he uses that side by, or he did against me, uses that side by side with the Saracen, and you get this pretty nasty block of skirmishing cavalry shooting at whatever's coming in its way, and it worked really well. Yeah, as I say, some of its parts was definitely more than what it looked like on paper. So yeah, really good really good choice. And then we get now we're into, is it a Sengoku Japanese? Is that how it's pronounced? Marks. Same principle.
We'll go with Sengoku Japanese. Yeah.
So, thank you. Which was Mark Hargraves. In a word, nasty for my army. I just would not have enjoyed fighting this in any way, shape, or form. I probably had to have tried for the flanks and possibly flank marched all the flex cavalry, because it's a really intriguing mix of drilled flex long spear, formed flex superior long spear. Because of that, it maneuvers really well, I would expect, given the number of cards he had and the fact they're all drilled foot, and they flex, so they don't care what terrain they're in. They're long spear, so if they're in the open, they don't care. And I'm an entirely mounted army. the war wagons would have died a painful death quite quickly if I'd got them too close. So yeah, not a happy matchup in any way for me. He had a bit of a slow burn on the Saturday, but aced it on the Sunday. That last game on the Saturday and into Sunday. And again, it's one of those where I read the list and I filed it away for future reference. It's nicely put.
I think special congratulations to Mark, because he's a relative newcomer to MeG, and yeah, I mean, I've looked at that Sengoku army he used, and I'm still impressed at how well he did with it, because I think it's beatable, but obviously people struggle to beat it. So there you go.
Yeah, Bob, I'd echo that. Well done, Mark, for that. It's yeah, come and stick it to the rest of us. Again, I played against one of these before. I think with Will Denham in a competition. I've beaten it with my Seljuks. It's not easy, but yeah, no, Mark's done great with it. More power to him. So we'll have to keep an eye on him now.
Yeah. Definitely
see what he brings next time and how well he does. But yeah, it's always good to see a new player come and shake us more old lags up a bit.
And then of course it's Nick and his rather rum cavalry.
That's useless army. This is.
Yeah. You just bring it out to embarrass the rest of us on how to use a horse archer army. It's really simple apparently, and you always manage it. I think my Polish would have had a fair chance. I'm not saying it's necessarily an even chance, but they would have had a fair chance. You being the master of your army would probably have swung it in your favour, I think, quite frankly. Although it might be more on the dice, but
you're saying I'm lucky.
I'd have liked to have had a go at it with my Mittani. Yeah.
Well, again, the protected skill shooters make a big difference there. Matt's army, as I said, I played Paul in a practice game, and wasn't with the Rum army. It was a very similar Indian Muslim sultanates one. Sort of, instead of having the Frankish mercenaries, it had elephants. But
small size difference.
It was, it's difficult taking on that army of yours. Because you've got quite a lot of superiors, got some shoot and charge stuff in there. It's nasty, but yeah, there's something. I'll just say, to blow my own horn, there's something about this Sultanate of Rum army. I've from the point I first used it, I've sort of got on with it really well, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it as to why it works so well for me. But it has done. So I'm certainly not knocking it. I like it. Maybe I was lucky in this competition. Four times out of 5 I defended on a basically open plain, which does help against some armies. But yeah, and maybe I didn't meet the really dangerous ones at times. But yeah, it's just, but it's back to the point Richard made. I've always banged on about. I've practiced a lot with it, and you have to be patient.
And I think that you're consistently high placing with it means that it's not luck, if you see what I'm saying.
I like to think I've worked out how to use the unprotected flexible cavalry, because most of them are 4s in this army. So
I know,
anyway, I'll put my ego on one side. I'll let you move on to if you've got anything to say to slag it off, please do.
No, I think it's a great army. I couldn't use it. I'd have sleepless nights before a competition if I was running four bases of unprotected flexible horse. I just wouldn't sleep, quite frankly. I'd be looking for a wood to hide them in and try and fight you with something else. But anyway.
Well, again, just how I got to this point, I started off with those sort of Turkmen tribesmen in 6s, and I've worked up to being able to use them in 4s.
Let my chariot set them.
Yeah, no. I think against your army, Richard. I suspect the Frankish mercenaries and the Mamluk would have to do some heavy lifting.
Yeah, I think they would.
Sorry, Matt. Over to you. This is your part.
No,
Do carry on.
it's all good. Yeah, then it's Jason Broomer and the Mali Empire. Right, I'm going to be honest. I've read the list. I've pondered the list. I've seen where it placed. I've seen what it fought. I still don't get it. Genuinely don't get it. I mean, it's a genius list to be used by genius is the only way I can describe it, I think, because I couldn't get it to work. I honestly couldn't.
I look at that list and go, this is a victim army. But it's not run by a victim player. Jason is extremely good. I think for most of us, we couldn't get it to be more than the sum of its parts. Jason can. If I used that, I would get it to be less than the sum of its parts, and some of its parts are pretty bad.
It's got 4 units of downgraded archers at 102 points each. So, in effect, it has 9 fighting units and 5 camps. Is my attitude. But he's not going to let you get to those vulnerable units. So he's breaking on 7 tugs, and he's fighting you with 9. So you've got to kill 7 out of those 9. And a player like Jason, that's not going to happen. His challenge, if anything, is to get the victory in the time with that army. But yeah, but that's the genius of Jason. He'll get you chasing things that you shouldn't really chase, in my experience, and then yeah, suddenly you found he's beaten you.
Absolutely.
It's one of those. I'd love to play him playing that army just to see him work with it, if that makes any sense.
Oh, yeah. It does. I mean, I played him at Cross and Crescent when he had Nick for in Byzantine, and it was really interesting to watch him and learn how he was using that army.
Yeah, I played him at Cross and Crescent. He was using Byzantine, and he doesn't make a mistake.
Yeah, but it's the same with any good player. I mean, it's the same with playing Sid. You learn stuff when you play these players.
And then it was Lee's Takeda Japanese, I think.
Yeah. So just a comment at the moment, we're in the top 3 now, of course, aren't we?
Oh, yes, we are.
Because Jason finished 3rd in the competition, so Lee's Takeda is the 2nd placed army. So
yeah, which is essentially the Sengoku list, effectively. Lee resisted the urge to max out on the cavalry, which is probably what I'd have done with the list, because it would have looked glorious. I don't think it would have made it a better list, though.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Same as the previous Japanese, this would have been a nightmare for me. All that flex long spear and throw in the superior power bow, and yeah, my army's not looking to play with that. One of those I thought would do well, but I didn't expect it to do that well.
It is. Again, yeah, I played this the same weekend. I played Paul's version of your army, and Lee beat me. I should also say this was another really lovely looking army on table. Lee's a good job on it. And the other thing I would say about this is because I have very little interest in Japanese history. I cover great swathes of the world, well, all the bits where horse archers went. And so the steppes go about 5,000 miles across Eurasia. I tend to cover quite a lot with that. But Japanese has always been a blank for me. But this I looked at this list when I played Lee, and I thought, that's really nice. I could almost see myself doing this army. Just that one specifically, not the Sengoku or any of the other ones, but this one. There's something about it. I just thought, oh, that's nice, different. And those pirates are odd.
It appeals to me too. I just can't get my head around the post 1500 date. Not for any. I think it's perfectly acceptable in MeG. For me, it just feels a little more. If I was going to do it, I'd probably want to do it in red or something like that in the Renaissance size. But to paint it would be a joy. I think
I would love to see you paint this army.
Oh God, don't set me a challenge because you know I can't resist a painting challenge. Yeah, you'll have me.
Rabbit hole, Matt.
Yes.
It's Japanese rabbit hole here.
Yeah, Matt was here, but he's now painting a samurai army, so he'll be back in 5 years.
All the lacing individually painted.
Yes. Yeah. Oh,
you know, it looks lovely, but you know, and obviously, again, Lee's a good player. Obviously, you don't come second without, you know, in a competition like this over 5 rounds without being a good player.
And then there's the big list at the top. James IV Scottish. Pikes. More pikes. Some more pikes. A unit of bow and a bit of cavalry.
But mainly pikes.
Yeah, to be fair, mainly pikes. Yeah. Again, it was one of those lists I looked at and thought, John's going to do well with that, but I expected it to stall. I honestly expected it would have a couple of games where it just wouldn't finish, because you know they're brutal, but fully armored, combat shy. You kind of figure, you know, people get out of the way, not do it. But again, I really wish I was there to see those games in progress, because you know, to achieve that with that army, I think it's a great result. I read your article on it, Nick, when you fought him. Actually, you fought just about everybody in the top 10, I seem.
No.
5 of them.
Don't exaggerate. I think 3 of the top 10.
But clearly, John thought about it very well and had it nailed down, because he did a great job.
He played a very good game against me, and he you know, because you got those fully armored front ranks with shield cover and special rule that allows them to basically stack them. Somebody who hadn't thought about it as much would have charged a lot more than John did, at which point the shield cover doesn't count. So there's more opportunities to shoot that thin crust of really shooting resistant pikemen off the front. No, he played it very well against me. It was, but still, the point one thing I came away from that game is I got 8 points off him. So it's like saying I'm 2 units off breaking you. On another day or another table, I can win this game. I never felt that I couldn't win that game, even though you sort of look at it and go, well, that front rank, and he can cover his flanks, is pretty hard work.
I would have fought it. I think I didn't.
Yeah, the thing that allowed me to fight it's the skilled shooting, and I think it would have allowed Richard to fight it as well. You know,
it's an interesting one, because you have to. I think John's right in, but I mean I would have sat there and forced him to charge me, because he can't push me back. So I'm then on white dice. It's then a matter of being lucky, I suppose, in not rolling the dreaded one that allows him to catch you.
You need those bits of luck, because I mean, as I put in my write-up, towards the end of the game, I finally knocked a base with shoot off one of his pike units with shooting, and then 3 shots later it had broken, and I was only shooting at it with 2 files. You know, once you can gang up on the one file that is no longer fully armed and shield covered with skilled shooters.
Then you're fun and games.
It can go downhill really. And I basically broke another pike unit by fighting it to the front with my superior cavalry, and because it was late in the game and some gaps had finally opened up, charged it in the flank with my long spear Arab horse. Yeah. So you know, you're charging to the flank of the combat shy people. That's quite nasty.
I think the danger is you become like a rabbit in the headlights, and again, it's one which you have to fight with a bit of patience.
I think a lot of the time, if somebody brings something that's unusual to a competition, they get the jump on people, don't they? People haven't necessarily thought about it. How would I fight this sort of army? And this one is unique. I don't think there's anything else like it, really.
Yeah.
You know, you say, oh, big pike army, so you know, like Sid's Asiatic successor or Steve's Swiss. No, this one's got a really different twist to it, and Yeah, I mean and of course we're getting the inevitable overreaction on the internet, aren't we? If it's some sort of super army, everybody will bring it because it's unbeatable. Well, that's a load of rubbish.
Yeah, they can all bring it. We'd probably be quite happy if they did, quite frankly. Because
Watch them fight as each other.
yes.
big green dice frenzy.
Just from a list writer's perspective, the thing I'd want to know was if it hadn't been defeated at Flodden and James IV killed, how would it have got on in a fair fight against the English? Because it was quite clearly designed to stop the English longbowmen from shooting into the ranks of the Scottish spearmen. And then would the English have had anything that could have dealt with the massed ranks of?
I'd fall back on the maxim that I used earlier, that the Romans don't fight fair. The English also don't fight fair. They'd have probably bribed half of them to go home.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, at Flodden, the one of the blocks of pike that didn't hit the boggy ground went straight over the English that it was facing, didn't it? You know, so you get the feeling if it had fought on a fairly flat field, you know, it would have been really quite bad for the English.
Yeah. Well, Flodden probably counts as a marshy, steep hill.
Yes.
Pike we're fighting on. So I haven't worked out what the pike factor would be on a
yeah, I think it's fair to say James IV possibly made some suboptimal decisions.
Yeah. Or the English got lucky.
Yeah, one of the two. Well, they needed to. You know, infamously, the army had run out of beer 3 days earlier. You know, it was quite an achievement to keep the army in the field without beer, if it was an English army.
They must have been in a pretty foul temper by then as well. So
yeah, perhaps they all rated as devastating charges or something, because
perhaps Howard just told his troops that the beer was actually in the Scottish camp. If you want to drink, you've got to beat the Scottish army to do it.
Yeah. It could have been, but yeah. But I mean, at the end of the day, I think we all say well done to John for picking an army I've certainly not seen on table before and using it very effectively.
And it did look good as well.
Oh, the front rank with the Pavises, with the St Andrews Saltaire on the front. Yes, it did. It was intimidating in its own way. It was really good. Yeah. Can I just before we finish this little bit up, just pick on something Matt mentioned briefly about the tendency in this competition, and I think it happens in a lot of open competitions, that people go to the later end of the lists more. You get a bias towards almost post 1000 CE. Am I imagining that, or?
I don't think it's imagination. I think partly you get a lot of what I call heavy troops. I think in people like armies that have a lot of frontal punch, perhaps, and they exist more in the medieval sections of the list. That would be my take on it, perhaps.
Matt, any thoughts?
I kind of agree with Richard, although we don't see the classics, the Romans, the successor pike armies, which are equally as heavy, and some of them have cataphracts. But no, I think Richard's probably right on that point. I mean, and the other thing I wondered about was whether it's the structure of the tournament season, whether we don't have enough later medieval style competitions. So when an open comes up, people take the opportunity to use armies that they haven't had a chance to use in the rest of the year, and they tend to be the later lists. But I can't say that for sure. It's just a gut feel.
You could be right. I mean, obviously this year has been a bit curtailed, so
yes,
it's unusual. But I've always had the feeling, as I said, that with open competitions, people move to later. So maybe there's like lots of heavy metal and longbows and things like that. So it's
maybe it gives you the maximum number of toys.
Could be. And the point Richard made earlier as well, and you did. There are more lists covering for the period. You get greater list density.
Yeah, particularly when you consider that Asian lists, not everybody would have an appropriate Asian list that they would want to take anyway, and so that actually extracts quite a large section of the lists anyway. So proportionately, you almost have as many medieval options as you do sort of earlier. I would say if you remove the Americas, remove the Asian lists, then 50% of the remaining lists are actually medieval.
Yeah. So.
Sets. That's probably slightly out, but it's not far wrong.
Yeah, and let's face it, a lot of them look very pretty. Knights in armour, heraldry, all that sort of stuff, and so it is. Yeah. Okay, I think that's it. Sorry, Matt.
Sorry. No, I was just going to say on that point of looking pretty, that was one of the things I was really impressed with. All the photos that people put up, the armies were just lovely, absolutely stunning. I thought. So
yeah, I think it was a really good selection of armies that all look really nice. So, what more can you ask for? Okay, well, I think that probably leads us naturally at the end of looking back at Skullrollers. So John gets to keep the very pretty trophy for the next year, and then we can all try and wrestle it off him again next year. So I think just to wrap up this particular podcast, I think maybe just a quick look forward, because we've got another competition on the horizon, which Will has just published the Runners and Riders online, Derventio, classical competition. So, I think, are we all going? I'm going.
I'm not. I am at the Society of Ancients conference instead.
Of course you are. Yes, yeah. Matt, you're there.
Yes. I'm running Indo-Parthian, partly out of something Richard said, which nobody seems to be able to get a Parthian army to work. And in my arrogance, I thought, I'll give that a crack.
I can do that.
I can do that. It's easy. It's not going to work, but yeah, I'm going to give it a try.
It is, yeah. Well, I'm taking early Carthaginian, which is just for a change. So I'm not taking horse archers.
No,
I was vaguely tempted by Huns. But I'm not taking horse archers. As somebody who's not going, Rich, I don't know if you've had a look at the Runners and Riders. I mean, it literally only has been published in the last couple of hours.
Yeah, I'm looking at the list right now, and things that strike me immediately are 2 Spartacus slave revolt armies.
Indeed.
That would be interesting if they fought each other.
Would the table take the weight?
Will we be able to stand the I'm Spartacus jokes?
My experience, I fought with the Spartacus slave revolt army once against a Hun, actually, and sort of ground it to almost getting a victory. I think I was 1 unit off breaking when Spartacus died. So yeah, that's going to be an interesting one, whether people can do enough damage in the time to break it.
That would be my concern with my army. And the longer it hangs around, the more chance it has of whittling you away.
I see there's a later Federate Roman from Keith.
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting choice to go later Federate.
And the Gallic Federate Roman appears as well.
That's an interesting choice as well. First we've gone Turkey.
I see John's running Galatian, which is about as close to a classical massive foot that you can get.
It's a brutal army, Galatian. He's obviously got the date there. He's going for the one where he can have all the warriors as the fierce warriors, short spear, devastating charger, melee expert on pretty wide frontage. It's pretty brutal.
Yeah, that's certainly a tough one. Pete Entwistle going with the Turcolingi at 476.
Is that the one he's taken before with 3 allies?
I suspect it probably is.
It is the date for the 3 allied list. It doesn't necessarily mean he's going to run it, but yeah, that is the one with the 3 ally list.
If you're going to take Turkalingi, that's the date to announce whether you're taking it or not.
Yeah.
It says, so yeah, we got a good selection from the Royal Achaemenid Persian on an early date. I noticed 545, so that's got all the options there. Through to 2 classical Indian Marian armies.
Yeah,
I note as well.
indeed. Yeah.
So
Yeah, I'm personally looking at it. I think it looks a nice mix. We got a chunk of Romans, some Hellenistic types, Seleucid and Alexandrian.
yeah,
I think Sid's there with his successors.
yeah, he would be one of my favourites to win the competition, I guess.
Oh, I think you could never discount Sid, and that's another of the armies he knows backwards.
Yeah,
And really well. I see Ray's gone for the Numidians, you know, and if I remember rightly, that's the army John Monroe took to the last Derventio, and he won it.
No.
okay.
I may be wrong on that. Perhaps if he listens to this, John will be able to correct me on that. But I'm fairly sure that's what he took, with a Roman ally in it. I thought there were. I actually thought there were going to be a couple more Romans. Well, in the sort of Republican Imperial type.
We've got 2 late Republican Romans, one in Italy, one in Africa.
I think it's 6 Roman lists in there. Another 3 that can probably have a Roman ally.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think we'll see quite a few Romans on the table. But if you'd have asked me, I'd have said we're going to get sort of like 5 or 6 between late Republican and early Imperial, and maybe the Imperial. But you know, we've got later Federate, Gallic Federate. So yeah, it's mixed it up. It's nice. But you know, overall, I think this should be a good competition, and it's always hosted very well in Derby. Okay, chaps. So you know, obviously,
everyone.
Obviously, Richard, it's a shame you won't be there, but I'm sure you'll enjoy the Society of Ancients conference, which I think, as I mentioned to you recently, it's something I think I must look into in the future, because some of the.
It has some excellent speakers every time, and it's a mix really 50-50 of sort of presentation sessions that last typically about an hour, and then 3 hours of gaming, and we do that both on Saturday and on Sunday. And on the Friday night, we tend to have some board games set up for when people arrive, and so it's a good event, all ancient and medieval themed.
So definitely something to look forward. And just to wrap this up, over to me and Mr. Hayward here, and I'm not going to ask Matt to predict who's going to win at Derventio or anything like that, but I think which of the 2 of us, Matt, is going to finish highest up, you or me?
It's going to be you.
Well, you see, I think it's going to be you. I think I just have this feeling you are going to do something with that Indo-Parthian and prove that Parthian armies can be competitive, and I think you will finish above me.
Well, my prediction, for what it's worth for me, is I will either have a cracking Saturday and a rubbish Sunday. I've already got it worked out and it works, and then I'll get cocky, or I won't have it worked out and then I will by the Sunday. You know, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. I can see myself being mid-table mediocrity. I think at times the early Carthaginian can struggle to finish people off.
The Parthian army definitely has that win big or go home feel to it. So
well, next time we meet, regardless of what we make the subject of the podcast, we can compare notes and see whether myself or Matt approve right, each thinking the other will finish higher. Thank you to the listeners, and we shall obviously get this up, get a notice up about when we're doing the next podcast in this series. So thank you very much for listening, and hopefully see some of you at games soon.